The Gold Glove. It's the one award at the end of the baseball season that really highlights the defensive side of the field. It carries a lot of weight, especially when looking at players to be voted into the Hall of Fame. Fielding is important for stuff like the MVP, but it can be overlooked, and the Gold Glove is meant to be strictly given to the AL or NL's best fielder in that respected position. You'd think that this award would be pretty easy to give out. Completely disregard hitting stats, and only focus on one position at a time. Who was the best defender just that year? Well, like any other award, sometimes they get these wrong, and sometimes they get them wrong really badly. Today I'm going to look at some of the worst Gold Glove winners of the last 10 years, and try to figure out, if I even can, why that player was even voted for the award. Now I want to get something out of the way. This is not entirely a list of the biggest snubs that I can find. Because trust me, there's a lot, and if someone wanted to be nitpicky, they could do it for almost every winner. I want to find the players who won the award, and when you look at their stats or compare them to the competition, it just makes no sense. Either there were several better options, or the other finalists were far better than them. Let me introduce you to some of the primary fielding stats we use in the baseball world today, in case you're not familiar. Even if people don't fully get it or already know these stats, I want to make sure that you have a general idea of what you should expect me to refer to over the course of the video. We're going to focus primarily on defensive runs saved and outs above average. There are more, such as UZR and total zone, but these are the two I usually see the most for modern player evaluation. They're also the two that I prefer as well. Defensive runs saved tries to calculate defensive performance into runs saved or lost for a player's team. It also wants to include the difficult plays or the range that goes overlooked in something like fielding percentages or errors. Also, something to keep in mind, DRS has only been available since 2003, which shouldn't be a problem for this video, but outs above average on the other hand is a pretty new stat, only going back to 2016. So there will be some players where I won't be able to refer to outs above average for, because it didn't exist. Right out of the gate, these two are similar because they both want to take range into account for defensive plays when standard stats don't. Also, defensive runs saved is based on runs and outs above average is based on outs. But outs above average is strictly range based, and it's much better at figuring out a player's range than defensive runs saved is because of StatCast. So what you mainly need to know is this. A positive defensive run saved and outs above average are above average, and a negative defensive run saved and outs above average are below average. The higher you're above 0, the better you are. The lower you're below 0, the worse you are. And 0 is considered average. I will say when it comes to fielding stats, I don't think they're as airtight as our hitting stats are. For hitting, generally most things line up. But with fielding, there are sometimes huge discrepancies between a DRS, outs above average, UZR, and so on. I have two pretty good examples of this with Fernando Tatis Jr. and Isaiah Kiner-Falefa. Tatis's popularity skyrocketed from both the 2020 season and his continued success in 2021. But one of the biggest narratives was that Tatis was a bad defender, and defensive run saved supports that. He had -6 defensive run saved and 22 errors playing short that year. Both are examples of advanced and standard stats that do not support Tatis as a good defender that year. So, outs above average actually consider Tatis an above average defender, with 2. He's a player who seems like he would have good range, and he did. Are 2 outs above average anything spectacular? No. But it's interesting to see such a contrast in this scenario. One considers him below average, and one considers him above. Kiner-Falefa, though, is the complete opposite. Playing shortstop for the Rangers in 2021, IKF had 10 defensive runs saved, which is beyond just above average territory, but his outs above average were -6. This is an even larger contrast than Tatis's. So which stat should we refer to? Honestly, I think it's all up to interpretation. I think you can make very sound arguments for which stat to lean towards and try to use them together. Or just use whichever one fits your narrative, I guess. You could do that too. But seriously, I think they can be used in tandem when we evaluate players. Player voting can be a whole nother story though. From what I've seen, MLB voters are actually pretty good at least picking a player who's within the top 3 to 5 at defensive runs saved among their position. Are they looking at defensive runs saved or outs above average? Who really knows, but sometimes they just pick the wrong guy, and I've noticed multiple factors that influence many voters to make the wrong choice when casting their vote. So let's take a look at some of the worst Gold Glove winners of the last decade. Let's go back 4 years to the 2019 season and take a look at the American League winners. I don't mind a lot of the Gold Glove winners here, but there's just one that doesn't make much sense to me. The Gold Glove criteria is a little strange because it requires 698 innings played through a team's first 138 games, but it has to be 698 innings played in general across all positions, and then they get voted for the position they played in the most, unless they're utility, which just became a selection for the Gold Glove last year and then complicates it even more. It's a little overly complicated in my opinion, and it lowers the options for fielders even if there were fielders who were far better than the qualified guys. For example, Among left fielders in 2019, Mike Tauchman had the highest defensive runs saved and outs above average at the position, but he played almost 800 fewer innings than the finalists, despite being statistically the best left fielder. And besides, DRS and outs above average are more akin to WAR than traditional counting stats. I do think volume of games played matters, but it's this kind of weird middle ground where Tauchman played 800 less innings and was still the best fielder in the league. So the one winner of 2019 that doesn't make much sense to me is Alex Gordon winning the Gold Glove out of left field for the Royals. Gordon played the most innings among left fielders in the American League that year, and he had -3 defensive runs saved and -5 outs above average. Michael Brantley would have been a way better candidate for the award than Gordon. He may have had -3 outs above average, only slightly better, but he had 11 defensive runs saved, which is significantly higher than Gordon's. And by the way, Brantley wasn't even a finalist for the award. I'm not really sure why either. Tauchman had less than 500 innings at left field, so I understand him not being there, but Brantley had 100 more innings than Grossman, who was one of the 3 finalists. The finalists were Gordon, Andrew Benintendi, and Robbie Grossman. Grossman wasn't anything special, but at least between the other two, he was the only one who had positive fielding statistics. So what made the voters want to choose Gordon out of everyone available? The main reason I see that can explain why Gordon won the award is simply because he had won the Gold Glove 6 times before this. The voters likely didn't see anything exceptional from any of the left fielders that year, and just thought it would be safer to go for the guy who had won it several times before. Benintendi hadn't won it at that point, and Grossman has never won one in his career. I think Gordon's previous wins were deserved. He was a Gold Glove first left fielder, and had very good numbers in the field in the years before this, so it's not surprising that voters would just assume he'd perform like that again, but is it really that hard to just check if he was still good? It seems like this is just Gordon's one dud year. I think overall he's a great left fielder in his career, but he still came out with a Gold Glove in a year where he really didn't do that good. From looking at a lot of footage for his plays, it seems that he just didn't make enough exceptionally difficult plays, and then had a few blunders as well. I'll admit that the competition wasn't crazy for the finalists, so voters were likely just going with the guy that they were confident would put up a similar season. But this is something that happens pretty often, unfortunately, and players sometimes become favored to win just because of past successes in the field, when that's just not really how this award works. I mentioned earlier that the MLB introduced a new category for the Gold Glove Awards in 2022, and that is the Utility Award. This award is meant for those defenders that play too many different positions on the field, and they should be rewarded for being so versatile. I think it was a great idea because players are voted by position, so a guy like DJ LeMahieu, for example, plays all over the infield. He may have his votes spread across his positions, which leads to him not getting recognized for any of them. This led him to winning the first American League Utility Gold Glove last year. Unfortunately, I think they've already made the wrong decision for the first utility winner in the National League, which was Brendan Donovan. Donovan had 10 defensive runs saved, which is well above average, but it's alongside -4 outs above average across each position he played. Those positions being first, second, third, short, left, and right field. I don't think this is a bad season at all though. The negative outs above average aren't great, but to have 10 defensive runs saved across 6 of the positions on the field, it's very valuable. I just don't think it's anything spectacular, and when you look at the 2 other finalists, they put up such monster years on the field that they really outshine Donovan for me, which makes his win a little more confusing. One of those nominees was Tommy Edman, who put up 18 defensive runs saved and 19 outs above average playing second, third, short, left, right, and center field. But there wasn't a single position that was like carrying those values. The second finalist was Dalton Varsho, who might have been even more impressive. Varsho primarily played the outfield in 2022, but he also racked up 175 innings behind the plate, which is really unique to see. Playing center field, right field, and catcher, Varsho had 16 defensive runs saved and 18 outs above average, albeit his catching on his own was actually holding him back a bit. So it looks like this should have been a race between Edman and Varsho, right? Again, I don't want to act like Donovan was a bad defender or anything, but I feel like Edman and Varsho easily should have paced him for this category, but Donovan came out on top. This is definitely a different scenario from the Alex Gordon one, considering that Donovan was a rookie and he couldn't have had any prior Gold Gloves to influence that. Edman and Varsho are also young players, with Varsho having no Gold Gloves either and Edman with his one for second base in 2021. So there has to be something else. Volume maybe? I don't think it's that either. Both Varsho and Edman played 25 or more games than Donovan. Defensive stats are something that can go up with more games, but it can also go down. I think the reason why Donovan won the Utility Award is because Edman and Varsho were also nominated for the second base and right field awards respectively. This is confusing because I thought that's why they made a Utility Gold Glove in the first place, so we could recognize the players that play multiple positions. So Edman and Varsho didn't win their Gold Gloves, and I think that's because their votes were split between the 2 awards. For instance, I'm assuming that voters saw Edman for utility and Edman for second base, and if they decide to vote for him, they likely only voted for one of the 2 awards. This resulted in Varsho and Edman having their votes split and them winning neither award. This then caused Donovan, the only one of the 3 who wasn't a finalist for multiple Gold Gloves, to come out on top. For our next player, we're not just covering one season, we're going to talk about multiple gold gloves that this player won, and maybe ones they shouldn't have. Salvador Perez from 2013 to 2018 won the gold glove in every one of those years except 2017. Clearly a dominant stretch, and solidifying himself as one of the best defensive catchers in the American League. Among American League catchers based on defensive runs saved, Salvi ranked 2nd in 2013, 8th in 2014, 12th in 2015, 11th in 2016, and 20th in 2018. It's just continuously getting worse every year. And other than 2013, he was not very close to the top of the league in those years. But to be fair to Salvi, that's not the only defensive metric we can look at for catchers. When it comes to catching base runners, that's where Salvi shines. In that 6-year span, which counts when he didn't win it in 2017, Perez caught the second most runner stealing in that time with 161, which averages out to about 27 runners caught a season. He also led the league with stolen base run save with 22. Now that's very elite numbers for catching base runners, and he's always been proficient in that area. However, there's one other problem with Salvi's defense, the framing. So while he was the second best catcher in that span in throwing out runners, he was also the third worst in framing runs saved. Framing is an extremely important job for a catcher, and it essentially rewards catchers that are able to get pitches outside the zone to be called a strike, as well as making sure they don't get pitches inside the zone called a ball. Unfortunately, Salvador Perez is really bad at this, and it's one of the most integral jobs for a catcher. Now, here's an interesting argument. Do the voters even care? Is anyone even looking at this? Well, maybe not back then, but they definitely are now. In 2022, Jose Trevino not only won the Gold Glove, but became the second catcher ever to win a Platinum Glove, which goes to the best overall defender in the league for each given year. The biggest narrative that helped Trevino to win the Platinum Glove was his elite framing, as he was far above any other catcher in the league that year. So it's something that's definitely important, and Salvi's framing is what's truly sabotaging him defensively. And for this one, I think we have a similar situation to Gordon's, where when someone wins a Gold Glove, it automatically makes voters assume that this player is a Gold Glove caliber player for the following years of their career. I won't argue against Perez's win in 2013, because while his framing still wasn't great, it was the best of his career, and he was second in the AL in defensive runs saved, and first in catching runner stealing. But that one Gold Glove was likely to influence for the next year, and then the next, and then the next, and so on and so forth. And I don't think Salvi made a big enough impact defensively to have rightfully won in the following years. In 2017, Eric Hosmer won his 4th and final Gold Glove playing the first base position. It was Hosmer's last year in Kansas City, and he beat out both Carlos Santana and Mitch Moreland for the award. However, I also just realized this is the 3rd Royals player I'm talking about, and I really don't want to make it seem that I'm specifically slandering the Royals. So I hope the overwhelming praise I gave Bobby Witt Jr. in my first video counteracts this a little bit. Hosmer had the 4th worst defensive run saved at first base with -5, and the 3rd worst ounce above average also with -5. This is out of every first baseman in the AL. You're probably thinking, well, maybe Santana and Moreland weren't that good either, and the competition wasn't steep, similar to Alex Gordon's. Nope, Santana and Moreland were easily 2 of the best first basemen in the American League defensively that year. Santana had 8 defensive runs saved and 9 outs above average, while Moreland had 9 defensive runs saved and 4 outs above average. It's not even really close, and they're both significantly better than Hosmer. Yet again, I think we have a situation where Hosmer won the Gold Glove simply because he had won it multiple times before this. Santana has never won a Gold Glove, and Moreland has only won once, which was in the previous season. That really didn't help against the 3 consecutive Gold Gloves that Hosmer won from 2013 to 2015. Another thing to note, this was also Hosmer's best offensive season of his career. So it could be the 3 Gold Gloves, but also we have another factor to influence Gold Glove nominations. Many people believe players who are highly skilled offensively are more likely to be nominated for the award as well. This is an excerpt from the same part of the Rawlings site where I got the Gold Glove criteria from earlier. Rawlings states that this award is not just solely based on fielding metrics and statistics. The Gold Glove represents overall fielding excellence and does not factor in offensive production. It's hard for me to believe any part of this statement when it's just not true. Just look at 2022 Soto. He was the worst right fielder in the league last year based on outs above average, and was a finalist for the Gold Glove. He had a subpar arm in 2022 as well. And this isn't a dig at Soto at all. He's actually been my favorite player in the league for several years now. But it just didn't make much sense for him to be nominated for a defensive award. So it's clear that offensive performances can influence nominations for what is supposed to be a defensive-only award. The last Gold Glove winner that I'm going to cover for this video is Adam Jones' Gold Glove win for center fielders in 2012, and this one is really interesting. I know this is like borderline in the last decade, but bear with me here. This Gold Glove win is really rough when you look at who else was nominated and who else could have won. In 2012, Adam Jones had negative 13 defensive runs saved in center field, which is the worst out of any player who played that position that year. We don't have outs above average for this year, but if we look at ultimate zone rating, he has the second worst in the American League that year from a center fielder with -6. So that doesn't help his case much either. It's actually the worst defensive run saved out of any outfield position that year, although you do have to consider the differences between a center fielder and a corner outfielder. The worst part is, there were some fantastic defensive performances in 2012 that didn't win this award. Denard Span had 19 defensive runs saved, and Craig Gentry had 15 defensive runs saved. This was also Mike Trout's rookie year, where he led all center fielders in the American League in UZR and DRS with 9.9 and 21. A 34 defensive run save difference between Jones and Trout. Trout was one of the finalists with Jones along with Austin Jackson. Jackson didn't put up numbers like Trout, Span, or Gentry, but he did have a good year with 6 defensive runs saved. So with so many great options even beyond those guys that were nominated, how did Jones come away with this? I feel like a broken record at this point, but out of all these guys, Jones was the only player who had won a Gold Glove before this. So again, it's likely that voters just assume that since he had won before, he must have kept having good defense in the future. To bring up another argument though, one of the biggest things Jones was known for was his arm. He was 3rd in the American League in outfield assists, so it could have been that they were overvaluing how much his arm was worth and not really paying attention to anything else. But also, his outfield arm runs above average were -1, so his arm wasn't actually as valuable as it was in his other seasons. And if we want to shift to standard stats, he led American League center fielders in errors with 8. Since 2012, it's actually the 5th most errors by a center fielder in a single season. So I'm just not really sure what people were seeing with this one. Another possibility is that the stretch of 3 Gold Gloves that Jones won from 2012 to 2014 were the 3 best offensive seasons of his career. So it could be the previous performances, it could be the outfield assists, and it could be the offense, but it's probably just a combination of all 3. Overall, I think that past successes are too much of an influence over an award that is based simply on a single season. And there's even more factors, such as offensive performances that can also influence these wins, and votes that get split up because of multiple positions. I do think that defensive metrics are much better over a season-by-season sample, but these are awards for a single season. And defensive metrics may not be perfect, but that's why we should use them in tandem. So what can really be done to fix this? It's easy for me to say just vote based on that year, but that just seems like the best solution. What makes evaluating fielding with just the eye test so difficult is that every player has different reaction times, speed, reads, positioning, and ballparks. A play that one guy has to dive for might be a play that another guy makes easily. I looked at a lot of Gold Glove winners, and I'd say most of them weren't really egregious or anything. I was surprised at least by most of the Gold Glove winners being a pretty solid choice. All things considered, it is coaches and managers who are voting, so I'd expect them to know what they're doing. But sometimes the worst winners do slip through the cracks every once in a while. Thanks for watching.